Yes, my friends, we're counting down the hours until we see the Rams take the field next Saturday. Even though it's the first preseason game, securing a win over the Chiefs is crucial. We need to start the season at full strength, and Coach Sean McVay isn't messing around. Today, I want to talk about a move many consider a mistake by the Rams. But was it really a mistake? Well, we'll get into that in a moment. I also want to share some important updates from the new roster. And man, I really like what I'm hearing. Before we dive into the details, make sure you hit that like button. But only do it if you believe the Rams will beat the Chiefs this Saturday. If you can, drop a comment saying, "Go Rams! Let's get 'em!" The Los Angeles Rams released their first unofficial depth chart ahead of the 2026 preseason. And while no one should view these names and positions as set in stone, there are some very interesting signs here. This is still the time of year when coaches evaluate players, test out combinations, and give younger guys a chance. However, looking at this list alongside recent roster developments reveals a few situations that Rams fans should keep a close eye on. And before we discuss the current roster, there's a former Rams player whose recent performance has reignited a debate about a past decision. Willie Lampkin. Lampkin is turning heads again, but now he's doing it for the Philadelphia Eagles. This matters because, just a year ago, he was with the Rams and put up a preseason performance that sparked interest. Los Angeles ultimately waived him with an injury designation. The plan was that if no other team claimed him, he could be placed on injured reserve. Philadelphia, however, saw enough potential to claim him and snap him up from the Rams. At the time, keeping Lampkin would have required a difficult roster decision. The Rams would have needed to protect him on the initial 53-man roster before potentially moving him to injured reserve, and that would have meant sacrificing another roster spot for an injured player whose return was uncertain. You can understand why the Rams made that decision, but now you can also understand why it hurts a little more. The reason is simple. Steve Avila and Kevin Dotson are both approaching situations where the Rams will need to think about new contracts. Los Angeles has several young players it will eventually need to pay, so having a cheap young alternative on the offensive line would provide valuable flexibility. Lampkin could have been exactly that kind of player. Instead, he is in Philadelphia and making people notice him again. That does not automatically mean the Rams made some disastrous mistake. It does, however, show how thin the margin can be when teams make those final roster decisions. Sometimes a player you simply cannot protect becomes useful somewhere else. And that brings us perfectly into this year's depth chart, because several players currently on the roster are fighting to avoid becoming the next name the Rams regret losing. The biggest conversation begins at quarterback. Stetson Bennett is listed behind Matthew Stafford, while rookie Ty Simpson is currently QB3. Some fans may have expected Simpson to immediately move ahead of Bennett because of where the Rams selected him, but the team appears comfortable developing the rookie at a controlled pace. That does not make Simpson less important. In fact, the preseason could belong to him. With the Rams traditionally protecting their established starters during preseason games, Simpson should have an opportunity to play significant snaps and show what he can do against NFL competition. Being QB3 right now should not be viewed as a final judgment. This is August, and the Rams have no reason to rush him. For fans, the important part will be how Simpson handles the offense when the game begins. Does he look comfortable? Does he make quick decisions? Can he respond when a play breaks down? Those are the things worth watching more than where his name appears on an unofficial chart. The tight end room might be even more interesting. Instead of giving us one obvious starter and then a clean order behind him, the Rams basically showed that they plan to use the position as a group. Colby Parkinson is probably the closest thing to a traditional starter. But the bigger message is that Los Angeles expects multiple tight ends to matter. Davis Allen remains part of that picture, even though he has been recovering from the thigh injury he suffered early in training camp. The Rams have been careful with him, which makes sense if they believe he will have an important role once the regular season begins. The message here is not necessarily about who is TE1, TE2, or TE3. The interesting part is that the Rams appear comfortable rotating different players and creating different combinations depending on what Sean McVay wants from the offense. That could become one of the most important elements of the offense this season. Another question may finally have a clearer answer on special teams. Xavier Smith was listed as the Rams' punt returner, with Konata Mumpfield behind him. Kieran Williams was not listed there at all. That is worth noticing, because Williams had been getting looks in that role. Was that simply an experiment? Was McVay testing another possibility before returning to Smith? We cannot know that from one unofficial depth chart, but Smith being placed at the top certainly gives us something to watch. For Xavier Smith, special teams value could be extremely important when final roster decisions arrive. Every additional job a player can perform gives the coaching staff another reason to keep him. And those decisions are exactly why nobody on the bottom half of this depth chart can relax. At inside linebacker, Omar Speights continues to appear positioned alongside Nate Landman, while Sean Dolak is listed behind Landman and Stewart sits behind Speights. Dolak is one of the names Rams fans should follow closely during the preseason. His current position on the depth chart does not mean his opportunity is small. Quite the opposite. Preseason snaps can give him a chance to force the coaching staff into difficult decisions. The same is true at edge rusher. Wesley Bailey entered camp as an undrafted player receiving real attention, but the first depth chart places him well down the order, with Keir Thomas II and Tomon Fox ahead of him. That is not where Bailey would want to be, but this is exactly what preseason football is for. An unofficial depth chart in August is not a final roster. Young players can move quickly if they produce when the pads are on and the game becomes real. Bailey now knows what is in front of him. If he wants a spot, he needs to make himself impossible to ignore. We have already seen how little these early listings can ultimately mean. A young player can be buried on an August depth chart and still become extremely important once the regular season starts. That is why performances matter much more than labels right now. Jarquez Hunter is another player facing an important preseason. Hunter, the Rams' fourth-round pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, is currently listed as the fourth option at running back, behind Ronnie Rivers in the order. For a second-year player, that is not exactly encouraging. You would prefer to see Hunter pushing higher in the rotation by now. At minimum, seeing him alongside Rivers would have created a different impression. Instead, the depth chart suggests he still has work to do. Again, that can change. But Hunter cannot control where the Rams listed him on Wednesday. He can control what happens when he gets the football in preseason action. Every carry becomes an opportunity. Every pass protection assignment matters. Every mistake matters too. The wide receiver room has similar competition behind the obvious top names. Puka Nacua and Davante Adams are the clear first-team receivers, while Jordan Whittington and Konata Mumpfield appear behind them. C.J. Daniels is further down the depth chart, with other young receivers filling out the deeper part of the roster. That makes the preseason extremely important for the receivers fighting behind the established stars. The Rams know what Nacua and Adams can do. August is about discovering which younger players can earn trust and provide depth when the regular season arrives. The offensive line also gave us something specific to monitor. Keegan Trost is listed behind Warren McClendon at right tackle, rather than being shown as a backup across several different positions. For Trost, preseason action should tell us much more than the chart itself. Offensive line depth is always valuable, and as the Willie Lampkin situation reminds us, letting a developing lineman leave can look very different 1 year later. Defensively, the Rams have some fascinating names to evaluate as well. Byron Young is positioned with Myles Garrett at outside linebacker, an interesting designation considering Garrett has generally been known as a defensive end throughout his career. The real question will be how the Rams eventually deploy him inside Chris Shula's defense We probably will not receive the answer during the preseason because the Rams are not expected to expose their plans with established starters in meaningless games. But the listing at least gives us an early clue about how the team views the structure of this defense. Around them, the defensive front includes Poona Ford, Kobe Turner, and Braden Fisk, while Josiah Stewart is listed on the second team at edge. Stewart is particularly interesting because his training camp work has drawn attention. Even without being placed on the first line of the depth chart, he has an opportunity to become an important part of the rotation. That is another reason fans should resist reading these listings as permanent rankings. A second-team player can still have a major regular season role. The same idea applies to the linebacker group and special teams. Stewart brings the kind of energy that could be valuable in both areas, while younger players further down the chart will be trying to prove that they deserve more snaps. There are also developmental players on the defensive side who should receive opportunities during preseason action, and those snaps may determine who survives the final cuts. Tim Keenan is one of them. As a seventh-round pick, nobody should expect him to immediately walk into a starting role, but the preseason gives the Rams an opportunity to evaluate how he handles NFL competition and whether he can develop into useful interior depth. That is really the theme connecting this entire depth chart. The names at the top are interesting, but the biggest story may eventually come from the names at the bottom. The Rams already know what their stars can do. They do not need preseason games to discover that. What they need to learn is whether Simpson is progressing, whether Hunter can climb the running back rotation, whether Xavier Smith can secure the punt return job, whether Dolak can push for a larger role, whether Bailey can overcome his current position, and which young offensive and defensive linemen deserve to stay. Those are the decisions that build the back half of an NFL roster. And Willie Lampkin is a perfect reminder of why those decisions matter. Last year, Los Angeles had a difficult choice involving an injured young lineman. The Rams tried to manage the situation, Philadelphia claimed him, and now Lampkin is standing out again with the Eagles. This year, there will be another group of players sitting near that same line between making the roster and leaving Los Angeles. The Rams cannot keep everybody. No NFL team can. Sometimes a talented player gets caught in a numbers game. Sometimes injuries change everything. Sometimes another organization simply sees an opportunity and acts. That is why this preseason is about much more than the final score. Nobody is going to care months from now whether the Rams won or lost a preseason game against the Kansas City Chiefs. What matters is what Los Angeles learns about the young players who take the field. Ty Simpson will have eyes on him because he represents part of the future at quarterback. Jarquez Hunter needs to show that his second season can be different from what this early depth chart suggests. Xavier Smith has an opportunity to strengthen his value through special teams. Sean Dolak can prove he deserves a meaningful role. Wesley Bailey can show that being buried on an August depth chart does not define him. And somewhere among all these roster battles could be a player the Rams absolutely do not want to watch succeeding in another uniform next year. That is what makes this first unofficial depth chart interesting. It is not a final answer. It is the beginning of the questions. So Rams fans, which situation are you watching most closely? Are you concerned about Jarquez Hunter being this far down the running back order? Do you think Ty Simpson should already be QB2, or is developing him slowly the right move? And looking back at Willie Lampkin now succeeding in Philadelphia, do you believe the Rams should have found a way to keep him? Tell me what you think, because these preseason battles could end up mattering much more than they seem right now.